Europe understands war. It's been right at the heart of the world's two biggest conflicts. And while nobody thought it could ever happen again, for the past 4 years, the continent has watched, worried and wondered how one European nation could invade and attack another. Hello, welcome to TRT World special coverage on the 4th anniversary of Russia's brutal campaign to take control of Ukraine.
Слава Україні!
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The cost of Russia's invasion has been death, destruction, despair, and certainly a demonstrable failure of diplomacy. It's now 1,461 days of war, but the history of this conflict stretches much further back. This is Maidan Square, right in the heart of Kiev. It's where the 2014 Maidan Revolution forced Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, out of office. Shortly afterwards, Moscow's anger showed. Russian-backed fighters in the eastern Donbass, they began an uprising against the state, and Russian forces occupied Crimea, which was later to be illegally annexed. As memorial services take place right across the country, Ukrainians, they're trying to come to terms with what's been lost and how long, if ever, it will take to regain control of their own destinies. TRT World's Randolph Nogel reports from Kiev.
February 24th, 2022. A day that would forever change a country and the lives of tens of millions of its people.
Everyone was leaving Ukraine because of the bombing, and West Europe and America would help these people.
And Ukraine has displaced between 12 and 14 million people, depending on how you count them.
An invasion by Russia that triggered the largest and deadliest land war in Europe since World War II.
We're going to be talking about this for the rest of our lives. This is the most important event geopolitically, really since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Now, entering a fifth year, some reports suggest total war casualties could reach 2 million in 2026, with Russian losses accounting for a significant share of those killed in action. But Moscow's war machine grinds on and continues to make territorial gains.
No matter what we do, how badly we want peace, what concessions we agree to, or whose whims we indulge, we simply don't know what's on Putin's mind.
Russian forces continue to strike civilian infrastructure across Ukraine.
This last year has been the hardest for me personally. The blackouts, the power cuts, the cold. Attacks got more frequent. When you see the drones, missiles are on their way at 8 or 9 in the evening, you think about getting dressed, sleeping fully clothed with documents in your backpack.
Today, the metro has become a refuge, a place that carries the hope of surviving what happens during the day and night. It's almost a mundane hope, to live one more day, to believe you won't be killed by a missile or a drone.
4 years on, they're still fighting for survival, hoping that tomorrow will be easier than today, waiting for a war to end that has already stolen so much of their lives.
Our special coverage this hour looks back at yesterday, what's happening today, and what may occur tomorrow. Randolph joins us now from the Ukrainian capital. Randolph, this is about the Ukrainians, but do you sense any change in their outlook from the first day you went there after the war to today?
Surely this is a day of somber remembrance. We've seen that throughout the day with a number of ceremonies honoring the tens of thousands of soldiers who've sacrificed their lives, as well as the thousands of civilians who have been killed in regular attacks. This has been a particularly dire last year, where record numbers of civilians have been killed since the beginning of the war. In fact, we have spoken to one such a person who lost his loved one in the early days of the war. Let's have a listen to his story.
Пришли к брату.
І у 18-му повернувся знову до полку Азов, і в 19-му ми зустрів Марину, і після цього розпочав свої, скажімо так, окольні путі по завоюванню цієї дівчини. Про неї в полку ходила така молва, такі от відношення у неї до чоловіків були. Про неї казали, що вона кактус з метровими колючками. Вона чоловіків навіть близько до себе не під. Тоді я пішов до неї, ми з нею, а вона якраз заступила в наряд, і ми з нею всю ніч проговорили, і от з того моменту ми склалися як пазл. Вона не мала, вона була тиловиком. І коли у 19-му, 18-му, 19-му році ми з нею почали спілкуватись, у неї перше було таке прохання до мене: навчи мене поводити зі зброєю, зі стрілецькою, з особистою, тому що автомат в неї був, але не чистити, не розбирати, не стріляти вона з нього не вміла. І от її так потроху привчав, скажімо так, до більш військового життя. На той час не вірив ніхто, що буде велика війна. З того моменту, коли вони переїхали, прийшов наказ, що вони перебазовуються на Азовсталь, а зв'язок був до 6 березня, коли в Маріуполі розбомбили вишки зв'язку. Тоді ми якраз спілкувались по телефону, не текстом, а вона подзвонила, і останні слова «Я тебе кохаю, бережи дітей». І зв'язок обривається. Зараз, повертаючись назад, дивлячись назад, це як от в нічному кошмарі було. Як я пройшов? Ну, перша моя думка, коли першу звістку в марті я отримав, я якраз сидів вдома зі зброєю, і перша думка, ну, без неї нема мене. І хотів ствол до рота і кулю в голову. Тому що її нема, і життя в мене також вже нема. Чим думка до мене прийшла: добре, а діти? На кого діти залишаться? Тому що з батьком вони на той час зі своїм рідним не контактували, у них дуже... Не я живу для себе, для неї, я живу заради дітей, тому що у них це день, коли десятки тисяч життів були зламані, але це не ювілей, це, як співалось в радянській пісні, це свято зі сльозами на очах, скажімо так, зробив нас більше українцями.
Well, joining me now is Halina Yanchenko. This is a distinguished member of Ukraine's parliament. Thank you so much for joining me. I just first want to ask you, this has been 4 years, obviously, since Russia's initial invasion. And in those early days, I think Ukraine shocked the world in its defense of its territory, now making it more costly than ever for every kilometer of territory that Russia is able to take. Now, looking ahead, it seems as though this war will continue to go on. Does Ukraine right now have the resources it needs to carry on for another year, if need be?
I believe it's not a matter of resources, and it's not a question of resources. We simply don't have another choice. We don't have another country. We don't have another home. This is our home, so we are defending ourselves. And therefore, if war continues, of course, we will keep defending ourselves. But personally, I really hope that we are close to the end of the war. I really hope that negotiations will give some results. However, something should change in negotiation process. I believe that Western negotiators are basically making the same fault, the same mistake they did during the so-called Minsk agreement, as well as Normandy format. They still try to press the victim of aggression and not aggressor. If you actually don't change the situation for aggressor, it gives it creates very difficult circumstances for negotiation process overall.
I see. Recent polling has suggested that as many as 2/3 of Ukrainians support the idea of fighting no matter the cost and not wanting to cede territory. At the same time, Ukraine has come under really unprecedented pressure, even from some of its allies, to cede territory. I know that that has been a red line and something that Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has ruled out. But is it even constitutionally possible? And what do you think would be ultimately the legacy of anyone who puts in that kind of policy, coming to the negotiating table and being willing to cede territory?
This policy is simply impossible. When we are discussing the so-called cede of the territory, we should understand that we are not talking about square kilometers. We actually are talking about people. There are 200,000 Ukrainians who currently live at non-occupied territories of Donetsk region. 200,000 people. The whole world have seen what is going on with Ukrainians under occupation. They are being murdered, tortured, shot on the back of their heads, raped. Russian occupants rape even women and children. Can you even imagine that someone would be willing to give away these people? It actually sounds like being back to slavery time when we are trading people. That is why for Ukraine and Ukrainians, this question is absolutely non-discussable. Russians know it. Russians do know it. And therefore, I believe, because they are not interested in the peace, they insist on this question because they know that it's not even a red line. It's the question that we don't discuss, full stop.
If I can just ask you one more question about what has been or perhaps hasn't been enough on the negotiating table. It seems like what really needs to be talked about are future security guarantees. Do you see this issue being talked about enough? Has it been spelled out? Is it even a realistic possibility with respect to Vladimir Putin and what he envisages for the future of a war that he began?
Yeah, well, we are happy with the process of discussion of the security guarantees, but we believe that it's very important to make sure that this document will be legally strong. Therefore, we consider it to be important to actually consider these documents by parliaments of our allies, not just, signing some kind of the document. We've already seen this kind of document. The name of it is Budapest Memorandum. It does not worth even a paper where it was printed. So we believe that if security guarantees will be discussed, will be suggested, they should be passed by the parliaments of the Western countries.
Halina Yanchenko, thank you so much. Just wrapping up our segment here, I just want to say that, this has been a somber day, but also a day in which there has been a renewed expression of Ukrainian solidarity. That is something that we have regularly seen as we've covered this conflict over the past months. Back to you, Adnan.
Randolph, thank you very much indeed. And also thank you, of course, to your MP guest there. For the past 4 years, Dasha Chernysheva has been telling us about the Russian position in this war. So has anything changed in the Kremlin's messaging, in its ambitions? Dasha, what do we understand regarding the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin's position on this day?
Well, we understand that this position has not changed, and Russia continues to demand the same things it wanted when it started this operation 4 years ago. It does want the neutral status for Ukraine. It does want to demilitarize the country and to make sure that there are no threats posed by Ukraine to Russia. Having said that, the Russian authorities have all been trying to consolidate the public opinion behind this rhetoric by spreading the narrative through the media sources. And we are now hearing many different undertones of that rhetoric. The latest turn here is the Russian authorities saying that there are ideas from the Western countries to supply Ukraine with the components for the construction of the dirty bomb. And Moscow is saying that they are going to inform the special services of those Western countries with regard to those plans. So the narrative in Moscow is that 4 years ago, the Russian authorities made a difficult decision, but a necessary one. They are trying trying to consolidate this public opinion behind this. But if you look at the reaction of the people 4 years ago, when people were shocked immediately of what has happened, and now you can definitely see that there is a much calmer reaction now with the people admitting and accepting what's happening. But let's take a look in this report at how the public opinion has shifted and what people are seeing most in terms of the effect of this conflict on their lives.
At first glance, life in Moscow appears normal. The streets are busy, shops are open, the metro runs on time. But beneath the surface, Russia is marking a milestone few expected. On the 24th of February, Russia's conflict with Ukraine enters its 5th year. What was reportedly expected to last just 3 days in 2022 has stretched far longer. And while the front lines lie hundreds of kilometers away, the conflict is still reshaping daily life at home.
My cousin was forced to flee Belgorod. They left everything, their jobs, their house. I went to find her, but I changed my phone number, and WhatsApp doesn't work.
WhatsApp is not the only casualty of this conflict. Russians have had no access to Instagram, X or Facebook, now labeled as extremists, for 4 years. And Telegram is also intermittent.
40% of Russians say that their day-to-day life was somehow disrupted because people have their relatives fighting, because they sometimes see this drone attacks. Significant number of regions, they experienced this limits of mobile internet last year, and I think this was one of the most significant disruptions.
In big cities, the government aims to make the lives of ordinary people as normal as possible by developing urban spaces, decorating cities in lavish ways, and implementing extensive social programs. For many citizens, it is just a new normal.
Personally, I have not been affected. I got a VPN, so I can access anything and watch YouTube. My life has changed for the better in some ways. I do, however, closely monitor what's happening, and I am worried.
The conflict is no longer something seen only on television. It is reflected in grocery bills, mortgage payments, and job prospects. The conflict has woven itself into nearly every aspect of Russian life, from how people communicate to how they spend, borrow, and plan their futures. What began as a short-term objective has become the central reality of a generation. Dasha Chernyshova, TRT World, Moscow.
Let's stay in the Russian capital and speak with Olga Krasniak, because Olga is an associate professor at the National Research University Higher School of Economics. Olga, welcome to the program. Always good to see you. If Russia's war aims are the same as they were when this conflict began, in other words, the denazification and the demilitarization of Ukraine, and now wanting the entire Donbas region in the east of Ukraine, how realistic really is that?
Well, it's a good question. Indeed, Russia has not been changed its position for a bit. And if we start with Donbas, we should remember one important thing, that since the Euromaidan in 2014, Donbas region was aimed as an anti-terrorist operation from Kiev regime. Kiev basically bombed Donbas and considered those people as separatists. And in this case, Russia came to help. This is one issue about the territories and people. Another issue about the demilitarization. Well, demilitarization, it's a Ukraine position to obtain NATO membership. And of course, Russia would never ever consider or accepted NATO forces in Ukrainian territory. It's not just only the land, but it's also the sea line of the Black Sea. And of course, it's Russia's security not to allow any foreign military services just to be in this territory. So yes, demilitarization of Ukraine and the help of Donbas, of Russian-speaking people who've been denied the ability to speak the Russian language, it's Russia had no choice, and yes, this war has been started.
Why don't we hear more dissenting voices in Russia? It's very rare in any country that's engaged in such a long war and has suffered so many casualties in its military not to hear those voices, because it's only normal to be concerned about the effect of war on your loved ones, and yet we hardly hear that in Russia.
It's a really good question, and as probably all know, Russians love history, and we look from historical perspective. Russia been fighting for its interests not even for years, but even for the decades. And for the Crimea, for instance, Russia been fighting with the Ottoman Empire for 300 years. And in this case, these 4 years of conflict, well, of course, it's a very long period of time, but we do not expect it will end immediately. And we understand, so it will take whatever it takes, and as long as it takes. And in this case, yes, we see the unity of the Russian people, and I believe as ever before in previous decades, with the support of Putin and with the support of this military conflict in Ukraine, because we understand almost half of the world against us, and yes, we're united just to resist.
I mean, I've heard many Russians saying, yes, our bills are more expensive, but there is a cost of living crisis all over the world. I've also heard quite a few Russians say that, look, I understand during the Second World War what we were fighting for when we were against invading Nazi Germany. But right now, I don't understand the philosophical direction of this war. What about President Trump's continuing statements that Russia's economy is in so much trouble that actually the cost of the war will almost force Moscow into a peace deal?
It's a narrative coming from the Western countries that Russia's economy is collapsing. It is not. It is top 4 economies. That Russian people do not know what Russia is fighting for. No, it is the opposite. We do know what we're fighting for. Because we understand, so the cost of everything. And Russia is continuing, of course, its fight. And what about the prices? Of course, they're going up. But we also understand it's a complex process because, European countries and the United States, they imposed a lot of sanctions against Russia. And we see it had impact on the global economy because with all these middlemen and with the third, fourth countries, with Russian oil and gas still distributed all around the world. And of course, the cost is higher, but it's higher for everyone. It's not just only the inflation what we have, it's not only in Russia. But to wait Russian collapse of economy, well, I think it's wishful thinking.
Olga Krasniak, thank you so much indeed, Olga. Right, have you heard of the meat grinder? We'll explain. It's pretty brutal. In February 2022, Russia had already had proxies in the eastern Donbass, which Ukrainian forces have been fighting for 8 years. So 2022, already 8 years of fighting. And that's where the focus was, where Moscow's invasion began on the 24th of February. Troops came from multiple directions, from the north, from Belarus towards Kiev, from the east here into the Donbass, and then from the south into Crimea. And within weeks, Russian forces had captured nearly a quarter of Ukraine's entire territory. The fight back, though, from local forces was effective. The Russians were soon withdrawing their troops in the north. They had failed to capture Kiev. They thought it would fall quite quickly. The front line quickly hardened into a long static line of control. This line is now 1,200 kilometers long. It's been a death trap for so many. In 2023, there was an intercepted phone call from the front line. In it, a Russian soldier described that front line as a meat grinder for the invading army. Today, daily fighting on the ground continues, but the movement, still hardly any. Vladimir Putin, therefore, is insisting that this war will only end when he has control of the entire Donbass. That's Luhansk and Donetsk. Trying to defend this part of its territory, Ukraine has set up fortress cities in Donetsk. Shadia Edwards-Dashti has been to one of them.
We've just arrived in Kramatorsk in the middle of the night, advised to do that because it's apparently safer in the dark. Having said that, it is drone infested. This drone detector beeps if a drone is nearby. We've heard explosions. It's already a quite intense journey. A night of bombardment followed, which isn't abnormal for this frontline city. The sound of air raid alarms wakes Kramatorsk up. But the city lies still, too still. In fact, half the population has left. Those that stay aren't going anywhere.
I've been in Kramatorsk since 1966. I'm sure this city will remain in Ukraine. It must not go to Russia under any circumstances.
President Putin wants the entire Donetsk region Ukrainian President Zelensky says that is a red line.
This is a very strategic point. Russia can't do anything without this territory. This area consists of hills, ditches, slopes, ravines and open areas. It's impossible for them to get here. My brigade and battalion are holding them there. It's fine.
Like Sergei, 75% of Ukrainians oppose territorial concessions, even in exchange for a ceasefire. What's being negotiated isn't necessarily peace, it's land. Territory remains one of the biggest sticking points at the table. Kramatorsk is just 20 kilometers away from Russian frontline positions, but it's still one city in the Donbass that is functioning. Kind of. Still, the people of Kramatorsk are defiant against Russian aggression on their doorstep.
We've gone through it all, we've learned important lessons and we have come out alive. We're forming and developing every day and that's why we will defeat them.
The city is on the cusp of the conflict, while the land is at the center of this war. But for the people, it is their home and must remain so. Shanti Edwards-Dashti, TRT World, Kramatorsk in the east of Ukraine.
We have a special guest in Abu Dhabi. Kakaber Kemoklidze is the former head of Georgia's National Security Council. Kakaber, good to see you. This meat grinder on the front line, there are Russian soldiers who have said that they have been tortured by their own side for refusing to follow a command, which essentially is a suicide mission. I mean, this is not sustainable, surely.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. Well, I think Kremlin is betting that it can absorb losses longer than Ukraine, and its Western supporters cannot sustain support in the near future. And these sort of news have been coming already several months. And I think that that's a clear indication that the system which Russian military is exercising on the battlefield is not sustained, and it's quite actually is tightened right now for this very moment.
Do you think those initial reasons that Vladimir Putin launched this conflict, this accusation that Ukraine is full of Nazis, that NATO expansion is a threat to his country's security? And while I'm asking you this question, I want to show the map of NATO and how this biggest military alliance in the world has expanded since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So if we see the new countries that have joined since that collapse, there are so many in Eastern Europe that if you just look at the map, you might think that Vladimir Putin has a case. But the point is that NATO is a defensive alliance, and it has never actually threatened Russian territory itself. So can you take us back to the first days of the war and the justifications that you were hearing?
Well, justifications, what we have been hearing, that was the two famous statements about denazification and demilitarization. And if we take like these two statements as a strategic goals from President Putin, I think the Russians, at the end of the day, totally failed in it. For several reasons. First of all, actually, right now, NATO is more united than before the invasion. And second, two states right now became extra members of the alliance. I'm referring on Sweden and I'm referring on Finland. Plus, if we talk about the demilitarization of the Ukraine, right now Ukraine is having more than 800,000 active battlefield troops with unbelievable experience on the battlefield, plus already well-developed military industrial complex, which might be a game-changing for any future conflict, what might be related to the NATO itself in the future. So no, answer is no. Strategically, I think they totally failed in this regard.
Do you see the nature of modern warfare almost being defined by what has been happening over the past 4 years? Trench warfare we have known for centuries, but there's something in the mechanization of this conflict which could influence future wars.
101%. I think like what we're facing on the battlefield of Ukraine, the drone warfare totally changed the conceptual understanding of the battlefield in a very pragmatic way. And it generally like cemented the idea that affordable drones are reshaping the battlefield economics itself, which is extremely big pillar in every, let's say, modern warfare. Expensive platforms are increasingly vulnerable, and I think the contemporary military affairs, contemporary warfare, will be definitely investing more and more in the drone technology and more in the robotics, in the robot technology.
Kakaber, thank you so much for the analysis. We will leave it there for the moment.
Pleasure is always mine. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's look at some of the diplomacy now. Donald Trump, he was boasting, remember, that he could end this war within 24 hours of returning to the White House. More than a year later, he's admitted he's surprised at how difficult it's been to resolve. Many wonder why the US president appears to be taking such a apparently soft approach towards the man who ordered the war. Vladimir Putin, he's continuing to make the maximalist demands he always has. Our North America correspondent is John Brain.
When President Putin's tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border in February 2022, the response of the United States was unambiguous. Russia was the aggressor, and the Ukrainians must receive America's full support.
Morning, Mr. President. Welcome.
President Biden even persuaded Congress to funnel hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military aid to Volodymyr Zelensky's embattled nation.
You're right now not in a very good position.
But when Zelensky returned to the White House last February, he received a rather different reception from Biden's successor.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards.
Ukraine was clearly no longer the favored partner. The Russians were brought in from the cold. In August, Trump welcomed Putin to Alaska to discuss how to end the war. Zelensky wasn't invited.
Trump say, look, Ukraine can't hope to recover all of its territory. Ukraine can't expect to join NATO. Now, those might be outcomes of a negotiation, but why is the mediator adopting pro-Russian positions before you've even got the sides to sit down at the conference table? And I think that was a string of what I would call gifts that the Trump administration gave to Moscow, for which the Russians reciprocated with absolutely nothing.
For the past year, Zelensky and Putin have been talking about their desire for peace, but not to each other. All their messaging has been directed here to the White House. And it's not been about practical solutions for ending the conflict. It's been about persuading Donald Trump that it's the other guy who's not serious about a settlement. And Trump has repeatedly flip-flopped. One day attacking Zelensky for not giving up territory, the next criticizing Putin for the continued bombing of Ukrainian cities.
I'm disappointed in President Putin. Very disappointed in him.
Is it the very inconsistency of the US position which is hindering the peace process?
The fact is, by going back and forth and, going from ceasefire, pushing for a ceasefire temporarily to longer-term peace talks, to talking about sanctioning Putin, to meetings in Alaska, I think it's really just been a series of distractions. And what we haven't seen is kind of a sustained effort to outline, the exact deal that we'd like to see them sign and then push both sides to get it.
What is clear is that 4 years after the war began, neither the Biden nor the Trump administrations have had the solution to ending it. John Brain, TRT World, Washington.
Just a few hours ago, Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the European Union's parliament. So what role does Europe have? Almost the entire continent supports Ukraine. But within the European Union's 27 states and NATO's 32 members, there are two dissenting voices. Our correspondent Joel Flynn joins us from Brussels. Are Hungary and Slovakia effectively helping Vladimir Putin?
I think some people will see it that way. Certainly, the Ukrainians have been pretty clear and direct in their language that they consider this to be blackmail. Of course, the Hungarians and the Slovakians have accused the Ukrainians of blackmailing them into greenlighting the sanctions package and the 90 billion euro aid package that the Europeans have been planning to take with them to Kiev with Ursula von der Leyen and others there today. The broader picture, of course, is about how much influence Russia is having within the EU itself. We know that Hungary specifically and now Slovakia under Robert Fico are very sympathetic and to Moscow and continue to have uncomfortable levels of proximity to the Kremlin. So all of this is factored into how the Europeans are trying to negotiate moving forwards with this continued support of Kiev and continued consideration of what they understand to be not only problems on their doorstep in the form of Ukraine, but potential security issues for them in the future if Russian aggression comes elsewhere.
All right, Joel, thank you so much indeed. We're going to go to the United States. David DeRoche joins us. He's a former NATO operations director at the U.S. Department of Defense. David, thank you so much. It's early in the morning for you. It's mid-afternoon for us in Istanbul. Why does Donald Trump continue to almost indicate that he trusts Vladimir Putin? I mean, this guy is a master spy, a master of dissemination and manipulation.
Oh, which guy? They both disseminate.
I was talking about Putin.
I know. Sorry for the joke. So I think it's because Trump is not a diplomat. He's a businessman, and his autobiography was entitled "The Art of the Deal." So I think he's trying to. In business, you make deals with people you don't have to like and you don't have to trust. I think he thinks that he can somehow find a way to manipulate Putin into an optimal deal without employing, military force, without providing extremely expensive capabilities that Ukraine needs to defend itself. So I think it really comes at its core. It comes from Trump's self-image and from his lack of experience in dealing on the international stage.
Of course, in December, the White House issued its national security strategy. Were you surprised that Russia was not stated to be a direct threat to American interests in this new national security strategy?
That's a great question. I looked at the national security strategy as more of a political document than a strategy document. It's true that Russia has declined. I mean, the consensus in Washington, we've passed an inflection point where Russia is viewed more as a regional spoiler, and it's becoming a vassal state of China. And there is a significant body of thought that's saying that China is creepingly annexing Russia's Far East. Vladivostok was originally a Chinese town. So that sort of reconquista is underway. The concept of that is gaining credence in Washington. I think that that document was edited with an eye towards ensuring that negotiations could continue. I think that it was done at a very high level, and I don't think the national security strategy went through the normal interagency vetting and commenting period that we get in past administrations.
So what do you see as the longer-term effects of this war, whether they be strategic or diplomatic, but the fallout? It looks as if it's going to be significant, certainly in terms of the way the European allies of Ukraine are almost coalescing to provide their own security in the face of pressure from America. But in other words, I'm being a little bit woolly here, everybody seems to be affected by the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. So first off, prior to this, NATO the military mission of NATO was neglected. When the former Soviet bloc countries applied to join NATO so that they could escape from what was basically Russian imperialism, NATO admitted them, but it was viewed more as a junior varsity European Union. There were no defensive plans for the Baltic states or for Poland. It was seen that you go into NATO, you provide your military, the basic military commitments, but without war plans. And then if you're good there, you can join the European Union, which is what these people mostly wanted because that came with money. NATO comes with obligations. The EU comes with money. The second thing we're seeing is just the imperial nature of Russia, which is, first off, they're fighting a war to reconquer sovereign states that they once had sway over. And I was taken aback by just how many of the people fighting are actually not European. They're Asiatics, or they're from other minorities in the east of Russia. We're not used to thinking of Russia as an empire, but it really is. The third thing, and I think you've touched on this earlier, is just the revolution in warfare. The Russian fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, is it's not a military capability anymore. It's more of a liability. It's hiding in ports in occupied Georgia. We've seen Russian strategic bombers attack thousands of miles away. Most of Russia's advanced airspace is now in Vladivostok to keep it away from Ukraine, which is regarded as a high third tier, low second tier power. And we've seen the loss of over like 1.2 million casualties in Russian casualties in a war that I thought would be over in 3 weeks.
Yes, but so did the Russians, of course, David. Do you see a realistic possibility of Donald Trump just giving up completely and saying, no, I'm not going to be involved at all anymore? Because if that does happen, it really looks as if Ukraine would struggle immensely to defend itself the way it is now.
Well, if he does that, I think that would be viewed as a budgetary gambit. Look, Europe has to support Ukraine, and they know this. And the French and the Spanish may want to take a powder, but the Poles won't let them do that. I mean, the Poles, the new allies, with the notable exception of Hungary, believe that the logic for Russia conquering Ukraine applies even more strongly to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and applies to a certain extent to Poland. So this is an existential issue for former Soviet bloc members of the European Union. And if the United States steps back from providing weaponry and providing financial support, Europe is going to have to step up, because otherwise the whole enterprise of Europe comes to a grinding halt. The new members of Europe and NATO are not going to allow Ukraine to fall, because they see that as the prelude to an attack on themselves. So we are kind of in a new era. The problem is Europe, particularly Western Europe, has neglected its own defenses and relied on the seemingly unending munificence of the U.S. taxpayer for far too long. And they've had a cultural shift where they're not used to fighting for themselves and their own interests. And that's going to be a profound cultural shift, and I think it will take a generation.
David DeRoche, really appreciate the analysis, always.
Thank you.
Very few world leaders are able to speak openly and honestly with both Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he can, and so Ankara has also been a peace broker between the two. Our diplomatic correspondent Hassan Abdullah explains.
When Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine in February 2022, Turkey was quick to read the situation and diplomatically intervene.
As Turkey, with the sense of responsibility imposed by our history, geography and civilization, we are working with all our strength to make peace and dialogue prevail. By fostering good relations with our neighbors, we strive to create a belt of peace and security around us. Our most sincere wish is for the war between our northern neighbors, Russia and Ukraine, with whom we have deep-rooted ties and relations based on mutual respect, to come to an end.
Ankara used its leverage with both countries to bring their top diplomats together. It also worked with the United Nations to broker the Black Sea Grain Initiative in July 2022. That established a safe shipping corridor and allowed Ukrainian foodstuffs and fertilizer to reach global markets through Turkish straits. Turkey also facilitated several swaps of Russian and Ukrainian prisoners.
I am grateful for Turkey's support. I would like to thank President Erdogan once again. We trust in the strength of Turkish diplomacy and its ability to reach agreements in Moscow. Turkey's active participation in the coalition of willing, especially in the military maritime component, is also very important.
The Turkish leadership remains in close contact with Moscow and Kiev. But there are a number of hurdles. A recent report by Turkey's National Intelligence Organization warns the war has reached a strategic stalemate. It says an end is only possible through negotiations and not through an outright military victory. The government here says it will continue with efforts to end the war and bring peace to this region and beyond. Hassan Abdullah, TRT World, Ankara.
And here in the studios, Aylin Unvernoy, a professor of political science and international relations at Beykoz University here in Istanbul. Professor, welcome to the program. It's incidental, but I think it's quite interesting. Apparently, Barack Obama and Putin hated each other. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin definitely didn't get along. but Trump and Putin do. So it seems as if Washington is now the main negotiator to try to find a peace here. So where can Ankara find some space to help as it has in the past few years?
Actually, here, when you look at the Erdogan's and Trump policy with regards to end the war in Ukraine, it's quite similar because Turkey previously already started this process since the beginning of the war in 2022 with the Istanbul Agreement. It was difficult to bring two sides on the negotiation table at that time, and just of course, it couldn't achieve the peace, the major goal of this agreement, but also the other efforts also prevented the negative side effects of the war as well on the ground. At least, and maybe the most important one is Turkey also provided the situation for not the escalation of the war to turn into a regional war. And so because of that reason, Turkey and the United States can work together. By the way, Trump and Erdogan also knows how to work together well. And also this war, as you know, that also changed the Russia's strategy in the other places like Syria and Caucasus because it weakened its influence in the other geographies. And so it also provided an opportunity for Turkey and the United States to work together in these areas as well because Turkey also became the game changer in the Caucasus by putting an end to war in between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and now also opened the way, paved the way for the United States also to develop its relations with the countries in the Caucasus as well. So on the other hand, on Syria, after the fall of Assad regime, we are also witnessing the different situation where we are experienced at the time of Assad regime. There was a huge influence or great influence of Iran and Russia at that time. So this game-changing policy of Turkey also creates some kind of collaboration or cooperation between the America and Turkey as well. And also both sides willingness to play more mediator role in different conflicts.
Okay, we're going to run out of time, so let's just go back to the Black Sea grain deal. One shipment of Ukrainian grain could make 40 million loaves of bread. That's how important Ukrainian grain is to the world. Could Turkey play a role in kind of monitoring any peace when it eventually comes, whether that's in the Black Sea or whether it's in territory that is disputed, the eastern Ukrainian regions?
Of course, Turkey can play. As you mentioned, in the grain deal, Turkey also played this role because the joint center of this, the grain deal, the center established in Istanbul, and Turkey was the one of the country who followed the situation because there were both sides also has some concerns about carrying of these commercial vessels of weapons. So Turkey was one of the guarantors who prevented this problem. And so that's why Turkey can, of course, play this role very well. And also it's voluntarily wants to play this role because one of the main foreign and security policy for Turkey is to maintain peace and stability in the Black Sea. And it doesn't want to see any of its neighboring countries in war. And so this is the major aim of Turkey is to end all these conflicts and wars surrounding its area.
Let's see what happens. Professor Noy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, the war has forced millions of Ukrainians to flee their homes. In towns and cities across the United Kingdom, Ukrainian families are trying to rebuild their lives while holding on to their language, culture and memories. Paul Hawkins reports.
Remembering who you are.
Jak sprawy? Okay. Is that right? Yeah. Good. How do I get? Out of 10? How did I do?
You get a 5.
While the older children prepare for a memorial service later, Natalia shows us around.
We decided to open the school for Ukrainian community because after start war, Ukrainian students or Ukrainian children needs help and support.
Everything, including maths, is taught in Ukrainian. And there's also Ukrainian culture. This fairy tale is called Mittens.
These kids, they arrived here when the war started, 4 years old, and now their English is much better than Ukrainian. Yeah. And these performances, yes, usually helps them to speaking, to continue, to learning our Ukrainian language.
But today is about marking recent history.
My wife called me and told, Ivan, please wake up because the war started. I told, no, it's not really, it's a joke. She told, no, it's really, please wake up. Everyone in Ukraine remembers it that morning.
And that includes the kids.
I feel bad for my grandma because she lived really close to the area. One time we were just walking normally until we saw a rocket land on the pond.
Oh, really? Okay, and how old were you then?
I was 5.
Wow, okay. You haven't forgotten that, have you? No. Do you know why you had to come to England?
Because of the war.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
For some children, the UK feels like home. For others, a second home.
And also in Ukraine, we don't do like small talk as much. Well, then if I walk by and it's just like a person I don't know in Ukraine, they wouldn't say anything. Maybe it would just be a smile, but like in England, they might like even ask you like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm okay.
Would you as a Ukrainian like to hear more from the government in terms of clarity about what's going to happen?
I think every Ukrainian here want to have a clear vision, yeah? Clear vision about their future, maybe here.
How do you feel about your future and the future of your children?
I think need hope about. But first my hope it's about stop war.
Paul Hawkins, TRT World, Woking.
Violence may be innate in humankind. Ever since people have been walking the earth, conflict has been a constant. Today, in the 21st century, maybe we consider ourselves to be more sophisticated and caring than our ancestors. But war remains, and whenever there's conflict, there's pain and suffering. Goodbye. Thanks for watching TRT World special coverage on the 4th anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war.